My guest today is Bill Anderson, the principal product manager at Mattermost. Bill, thanks so much for taking time to join me today.
Thanks, Jason. Nice to be here.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion today. Above all, people working in the military, intelligence, and other national security situations get things done when they collaborate. Full collaboration requires the sharing of data in multiple forms. And that's, of course, where the challenge always comes in. Despite good intentions, everyone in a work group, unit, mission, or even bureau usually doesn't have all the same level of clearance. Some may be working in a skiff, others at home teleworking. Sometimes collaborators are from different nations. Sometimes data information must move over untrusted channels. And sometimes answers come out of processing both controlled unclassified information and classified data together. For how agencies can balance all of these needs and still get their missions done, we turn to Bill Anderson from Mattermost. Bill, let's just start with some basics. When we talk about data, the first thing we have to talk about is cybersecurity, how to protect that data, how to protect those systems. We know that the cybersecurity postures of agencies change, the threat is always increasing and changing. What are some of those big challenges you're seeing today for federal agencies when they talk about collaboration?
Well, if you followed all the rules, you'd unplug your monitors. In fact, you'd leave them in their original boxes unpowered. That's secure. Everything else introduces risk. But yeah, we want to collaborate. We want to use our data. We want to share it. The trouble is when you go to share it is what are the rule sets? And it's the concept of collaboration is easy until you actually ask, well, what are the rules? Who can I share it with? Who's the oversight? What type of data am I using? How do I know about clearances? How do I know about other aspects? There's a bunch of things you have to think about around data retention too. So the Government Records Act, right? You've got to be able to retain these things while keeping them secure. So it's complicated. Um, Within a single organization, and that's the simplest case, where everyone is inside the building or inside the virtual walls of the organization, even that's complex. You have, let's say, different levels of clearance, but within a clearance level, as this audience knows, you also have program clearances. Need to know. Not everyone needs to see everything. And so you get down to this granular level of determining how can I have 10,000 people on a server, doing collaboration. So I'm sending direct messages to people, I'm sending files and other objects. I'm working in channels around mission-focused things with other people. I'm perhaps running structured processes to, execute against, sets of tasks that have been defined. And that's a collaborative activity as well. One that, in fact, all of these that needs to lay down an audit trail. However, as we all know, if anyone's worked in the space, what's your clearance, what programs you're allowed in, what's your responsibility this week, that changes. It changes regularly. So one of the first things you got to think about is let's think of a real simple case. We're in a channel where we're working on channel, a program that's called Program Orion. We're all allowed to be in Program Orion. So we set up a collaboration system that lets there be a channel. Let's call it, launch schedule planning and logistics channel. 400 people participate in that channel. They talk about the things that matter. And the key word to let you in is you have to be cleared for program Orion. Um, I guarantee you on a given week, 10 people will be having their security clearances reviewed. And when they're in that state, they're not technically allowed into program Orion. So the way our collaboration system works is when that sort of authoritative source of information changes, that gets synchronized to the user's profile we have a collaboration software platform called Mattermost. So I'll say Mattermost, that's what I mean. And government uses Mattermost fairly substantially because of things like this. So when that property changes, those 20 people who are today no longer part of Orion are not in the Orion channel. They might still be using Mattermost to transact the rest of their business, but they're not part of Orion today, so they're not there. But what happens is next week or tomorrow, reviews finish, they're back allowed with Orion. We've got to let them back in the channel. Now multiply this by the number of parameters around 10,000 users, and you see the complexity, even within a single organization. So that's starting with the basics. Just design a platform that thinks about data rights, privileges, and attribute-based access control to those objects. So basically, we think about a zero trust approach. Who are you? Who are you today? What are your permissions today? What are you trying to access? Are you allowed to access it today? And then, securing the whole darn thing underneath various layers of protection, including, I know you probably asked me about this, but what about quantum threats? Yes, including quantum threats. What's coming down the pipe? And there may be folks in the audience rolling their eyes right now. Oh, quantum, quantum. I keep hearing about quantum. Why is that a big deal? It's not a big deal today. It can't read your mail today. Can't read your mail today. No worries. Can't read your mail tomorrow. Probably won't be able to read your mail for about 10 years. And in fact, there's a range on that estimate. It's somewhere between 10 and 30 years. This is what the experts think before those quantum computers will read your mail. The trouble is, if you're writing mail today that is meant to be safe for 25 years or 30 years, you're already in trouble. You're already exposed because our adversaries are recording what we're saying today when they can get their hands on it, and they'll figure out later when they get the computers, the quantum computers to break it. So anyway, so we think about things like that. And then we think about just sort of common architecture and what administrative rights have. What happens, here's another example. What happens when you're collaborating in a channel, you're in the Orion channel, and it's IL, let's say it's IL5 or IL4, right? It's not critical, but somebody posts something in that channel that comes from a higher classification level or might have come from a higher classification level. There's a file. Maybe it's a floor plan, right? If somebody posts a floor plan, oh, we've got to get together later this afternoon. Can somebody tell me where it is? And somebody posts a floor plan. That floor plan may not be allowed in that channel. What do you do about it? Well, a good collaboration platform thinks about stuff like that, thinks about the ability to have the users flag it and go, I don't think that should be there, and have it quarantined and removed right away. And to have a record of who might have or actually was in the channel that saw it so that the security folks can come through and mitigate that. 3 people might have seen this document while it was in there. We took it out. We know for sure it was only these 3. We can deal with it. And then somebody on the security side can look at the document and say, that's not a floor plan, or it is, but it's not classified, it's allowed. And then they permit it and it goes back into the channel. So even within a single organization, what starts as a simple question actually becomes complex pretty quick. I've already touched on 3 major areas of innovation. Now, when we start going across sorry, Jason, do you want to ask a
Yeah,
question?
let me jump in because I think there's a lot going on here, and I think it's helpful to kind of maybe dig out a little bit about what some of those let's dig into those challenges a little bit. First of all, you're talking about collaboration because when we across so many different organizations, and even within one organization, there's so much. So break that down for me because you definitely hit a couple key words here, not just zero trust, which we all love to talk about, but attribute-based access control. We've been talking about ABAC for years and years and years. Why is that maybe easier, different? Why is that more acceptable? You pick the word you use today than maybe it was 3, 5, 7 years ago. What about ABAC?
Yeah, we love ABAC. It's a smart and granular way of applying a zero trust framework. So it isn't, we're well beyond the era of having a walled system with a crunchy perimeter and pretending that the adversaries can't get in. We don't have a perimeter. Our teams are virtual. Some people are even working from home, and others are working, somewhere out in the field and on a mission, or they're moving from point to point, or they have a mobile phone in their hand and they're using Mattermost to operate, flight planning from a mobile phone, or they're just communicating with their colleagues. So you can be in a lot of places. The perimeter has dissolved. So that's why we think about attributes, because that lets us apply that principle at the time of use. Who are you? What are you allowed to do? What are your properties? What are you trying to access? What are their properties? And what are the rules at this time?
But to get to that ABAC and to get to those attributes, that needs to be set up on the front end. So we know Bill Anderson can see this data and has read privileges, but not write privileges, or has read and write privileges. Is that something agencies are getting better at? Is that getting easier through technologies? that, the automation side, the connecting back to HR systems. Why are we able to do ABAC easier today than maybe we were, again, 3, 5, 7, 10 years ago?
I think we're getting better at it, but a lot of these systems are being held back by proprietary or closed source technology. One of the things that, is an enabler that makes this stuff work is we use open APIs, we use open source, we use standards. So we're not reinventing the wheel and then accidentally creating a system that's not interoperable. Like at the low level for authentication, you start with Active Directory and LDAP sync, right? So that you don't have to manually replicate a set of rules. Because if you try to manually replicate anything, it doesn't scale. It takes too much work, and people just don't keep it up to date. So instead, the idea is do it once, have an authoritative source in one place where it makes sense, and then propagate that through. Use SAML groups to define rules for access. Use LDAP to update credentials as they change. Um, so there's the fitting into existing systems is part of what you have to do. Just understand what the customers are doing and do that. Or don't create something new. Just do what they're already doing. Um, and then, yeah, there's some architecture. Like in Mattermost, there's a bunch of new architecture that we've been implementing to do this in a more intelligent way. So you think about the fact that if I'm going to do ABAC, I need to understand that all kinds of objects in the platform have properties. So we built the property system in. So I could have a calendar post that is also a card that's tied to a flight logistics plan. I could have a conversation that's going on in a channel, but the conversation is tagged with metadata. Um, then there's the information about me as a user and the channel and what those properties are. So I think it's a long-winded answer. It's getting better. The answer is open standards and implementing them. It is still hard because the devil's in the details on keeping this information up to date.
Bill, we're going to jump out and take a quick break. When we come back, there's so much more to address here because this idea of sharing and collaboration and keeping it secure, it's an ongoing challenge. But first, we'll take a quick break. My guest today is Bill Anderson, the Principal Product Manager at Mattermost. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to Federal Insights, sponsored by Mattermost on Federal News Network. Welcome back to Federal Insights, sponsored by Mattermost on Federal News Network. I'm Jason Miller. My guest today is Bill Anderson, the Principal Product Manager at Mattermost. Now, Bill, before break, we were talking a lot about kind of the challenges agency face with collaboration. We got into zero trust, ABAC, and a lot of these kind of big pillar items that agencies have been trying to tackle for years. But just because these challenges still exist today as they have over the last 15, 20 years, it doesn't mean there's not good examples of successful interagency collaboration. So I'll ask you to give us a good example of something that you guys have worked on. Give me something that says, hey, here's this in actual action.
Yeah, one of Mattermost's most important and largest customers is the U.S. Air Force. And an example in there is the Air Mobility Command. They run the logistics for the Air Force. So they deal with flights, all kinds of flights. And then, again, we wish it was this easy, but it's never just about the flight. It's about what's the cargo and what's the crew and what's the route and what are the diplomatic requirements and ramifications. How's the weather? What's the maintenance status? Do we have the right parts? All of that has to come together to make a decision, and they use Mattermost for that. They use our structured processes, our collaboration. The security, of course, is tantamount. So they self-host. In fact, what they do is they use a system called Platform One, which is a government-to-government software factory. I'm sure you're familiar with Platform One. So Platform One actually runs Mattermost for the Air Force. They did a really big collaboration exercise with allies, and Mattermost platform was part of that. It's an exercise called Mobility Guardian. They do it every year. So it's a recurring readiness exercise. They had United States, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, France, and Japan in that one. There were about 15,000 people, taking place in the Pacific and in just an enormous physical area. And what they were doing was they were integrating with all those allied forces to do airlift, aerial refueling, aeromedical evaluation, humanitarian disaster assistance um, exercises. It's largely unscripted, and that's intentional. It's so that they can then figure out, how do our tools work and how do our people prefer to work. When they run into problems, what do they figure out on their own to solve those problems? So, basically they used it to test, command and control applications and collaboration tools. And this was in a perfect example for the military. Degraded operating environment, right? Not everything connected all the time. You didn't always have high bandwidth. Um, so they deployed Mattermost and used it to sort of enable these flight crews to securely access each other, messaging, hey, we're doing this, what are you doing, where are you, we're going here, when are you going to be there? um, Problem solving using the collaboration capabilities, so we're all in the same place, we're all talking about this particular flight. um, and then just sharing documents. There's an awful lot of document sharing. Again, because they're government records, you need to have records of the records being shared. So that's sort of fundamental to the platform. And on the US side, they really care about the sort of sovereignty of the data, um, the sovereignty of so where is it, who controls it, how do we know that it's our data, that it's not accessible to the wrong people. And the other thing that the feedback we got from them on this, it went very well. The feedback was, we loved, and I mentioned it in the previous segment, the seamless integration. So we have we love open standards. And the fact that we have an open API for plugins, for example, let Air Force integrate their own open source applications into Mattermost. So this is not a, bespoke, you buy it from a giant systems integrator and it does what you paid them to do. This is a platform that the customer controls, that they can add their own pieces to when they need it, or they can take advantage of somebody's already done an integration, and it lets you connect it. So in this sort of huge, it wasn't even interagency, it was inter-country collaboration effort. Mattermost was one of the tools, like the main tool for comms and collab. Um, and it was severely tested, as you could imagine, in that kind of moving environment. It came out very well.
So, Bill, let me jump in. One thing when you talk about the test, what kind of metrics are we looking at? Are we looking at just ease, integration, security? Did you have red teams banging against it to say not just your Mattermost platform, but the bigger platform? Like, how did you measure the impact? Because it's one thing for people to say, "Yeah, I loved it," but they also probably there's 100 tools that they could say they love. So what were some of those metrics?
Yeah, that's a great question. First one is, did it work? I mean, and did it work is subjective, right? But did the exercise meet its overall goals? Yes, it was an extremely satisfactory exercise. So as a often as a product manager, I'm asked for metrics. How are we doing? And I go to the top one. What matters the most to this organization, right? Are we, in our case, we're a commercial company. Are we making money? Because we do like meeting payroll. So, at the top level, that's what you ask. So in the Air Force case, it's, did it work? Could we actually allow the airmen to and our allies to interoperate and communicate? So that's the big one. The refined metrics, like what was the throughput and how many messages could we handle per second, that sort of thing, is not information that we're allowed to share because of the sensitivity of the actual operations. So in fact, we probably don't know some of those metrics because they're sensitive. So in fact, I know we don't know some of those metrics because we don't have the need to know. So zero trust principle applied. Um, yeah. So sorry, there's a long-winded answer for, it worked, but I don't know the details, and those that I do know, I can't share with you.
Well, fair enough, fair enough. I think one of the things that folks are looking at is, okay, does it work for me? How does it make my life easier? And I think that's obviously something that is paramount when you talk about these big exercises, or even when you talk about real life scenarios. Can I get that collaboration improved? Where are we heading next with collaboration? Obviously, cybersecurity will continue to remain a big piece. You mentioned quantum. We could talk a little bit about that. But as you all are continuing to kind of advance this idea of how can we make sure it's secure but easy, what should we look at over the next 6 or 12 months?
Yeah, so the big things to look at are further integration of solutions that are enabled by AI. We don't lead with AI, but we have AI in the platform, and it serves certain solution purposes for our customers. It's not about being a great chat tool that you can ask, "What's the weather going to be like, and what should I wear?" It's more things like, and we do this with partners, and our customers make their own decisions about what models they're going to deploy because security matters so much in this space. Our customers, especially in the military, DoD, you know, defense industry in general, cannot use open cloud-based models. They do sometimes. They shouldn't, because the information about your queries reveals your intentions, the things that you know and the things that you don't know. And when you put that out over the internet to one of the big cloud-based models, you don't know that you're the only one that knows what you're asking for. If I was an adversary, I'd be camped out outside all those big cloud providers to try to collect that information, because it would be very interesting when it was coming from certain IP addresses. So they can't do that. Instead, they build their own models and they train them with information that's mission specific. So we need to have knowledge to support decisions in the Space Force. Why? Because a lot of the Guardians are between 18 and 25 years old. They're learning how to do their jobs. What they want is decision assistance. Hey, we noticed you were making this decision. Can we bring some other information to bear here? You didn't look at these sources. You might have wanted to look at this. There are some experts in your area you might want to consult with when you're deciding on how to do this sort of thing. And so Mattermost doesn't build those systems. We enable them. We actually help the customer to choose which ones they're going to use, and then they get delivered through the platform. So that's a big one. Sovereign platforms and sovereign AI is the general theme. You need to control where your data is. You need to know where your queries are going. And so one of the big shifts that is actually benefits Mattermost in this case is a shift away from that first generation. We're going to use these open platforms that are on the internet because they're really easy to sign up for. I could just do a subscription and get a chat service. Now that we figured out that chat and collaboration is great, the scrutiny is, where are you sending your data? That's not approved. You can't do that, we're at that state now, is you can't do that. We want you to use the Platform One solution. We know where our data is there, and we know it meets all our security requirements. The other big thing we're going to see are cross-domain collaboration systems. So where Agency 1 works with Agency 2, and they each have a Mattermost server that runs through a shared channel or multiple shared channels to each other just for certain subjects where they're collaborating. And those things run through a cross-domain system, one that actually enforces the basically NSA level restrictions on what data is allowed to pass back and forth. And so that is an extremely valuable solution for a lot of agencies who want to collaborate and are currently forced to do things that are slow, like write their messages out on a CD-ROM and walk them out of the building. Right? They don't want to do that anymore. They want to actually catch up with the speed of information and do it through a platform like ours.
I don't know why they wouldn't want to continue to write to a CD-ROM and carry that out the building. I mean,
They 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 actually do. I know
that
of customers that still have to do that.
well, hopefully they will catch up with that monetization side because it sounds like collaboration platforms and things like Mattermost and others are still are enabling agencies to feel more secure. Unfortunately for us, Bill, we're out of time. So let me thank my guest. Bill Anderson is the principal product manager at Mattermost. Bill, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thanks, Jason.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Mattermost.